Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To all of you again, thank you for a lifetime of service. I look forward to the closed session where we can go in more detail on some of these topics, as I'm sure you do as well. But this is an important session because we can speak to the American people. You can speak to the American people about the threats that we are facing. It's a chance to remind them, although I think the last few weeks have clearly done the reminding for us about the threats that we face around the world. To talk about almost anything else seems quite tone deaf because of the focus of the American people on that. And that's why, although I have some questions that are unrelated to the current situation in Ukraine, I think there's some other work that we need to mention as well. But again, it gives a chance for you to highlight your agencies and the great work you do, and I'm grateful for that. And for the benefit of the American people as well, there are some other, as I said, other issues that I think we should talk about, although briefly. Then I want to reserve as much of my time as I can to come back to the Ukraine. Director Haynes and really all of you, in the last year we went through this thing that made several of us on the committee very uncomfortable, in the sense that there was a DHS and FBI mandate to report on domestic violent extremists or extremism. Director, that mandated that you chose to, at that point on March 21st, to release a standalone report, which is something quite unusual to take a single issue like that, with a standalone report from the DNI, talking again about domestic violent extremism. And there's obviously a lot of work, a lot of intense analysis, which again, the reason that I'm concerned about that, as I've expressed, I think all of you, is a sense we should never turn the awesome power of the CIA or the awesome power of the NSA on American persons. And I believe that you all agree with that. And it seemed like we were approaching that line. Interestingly, in this most recent report, do you know how many times DVEs are mentioned? 0. Not a single time. Which begs the question. I mean, there's a couple perhaps explanations. One of them is that we fixed the problem, which seems unlikely. I've never seen an example where one report highlights something as this is an intense area of issue for us, and the next year it's not mentioned at all. I'm afraid that the work last year was a result of political pressure. And I wonder if any one of you would like to perhaps offer an explanation for why it was so important a year ago and yet doesn't make it into the report at all in this most recent.
Sure, I can start. So it is mentioned, it's just under a separate name. You'll see we talk about racially or ethnically motivated violent extremism, and that is a form of, in many respects, domestic violent extremism. Obviously can occur in other places, but it also occurs domestically. And it does remain a problem, but I will turn to Director Wray to talk about how much of a problem.
Well, from the FBI perspective, domestic violent extremism, of course, is central to our mission, separate and apart from authorities that others in the intelligence community might have, and we're aggressively pursuing it, and it remains a very significant high priority.
And Director, I agree with that you should, as the Director of the FBI, have that responsibility. What made us uncomfortable was we were doing it within the framework of many assets and the efforts of those within the intelligence community, which once again, we should have a very clear line between those two efforts. If I could, in the minute I have left, Director, according to some open source reporting, the FBI purchased NSO spyware Pegasus in 2019 and evaluated the program under a name called Phantom. Can you confirm that, if that's true or not?
What I can tell you is that the FBI has not and did not use the NSO products operationally in any investigation. I can confirm that we bought a limited license for testing and evaluation. So not used in any investigation of anyone, but rather as part of our routine responsibilities to evaluate technologies that are out there, not just from a perspective of could they be used someday legally, but also more importantly, what are the security concerns raised by those products. So very different from using it to investigate anyone.
So I understand that you did purchase a program and you tested it. Is that accurate?
We had a limited license for testing and evaluation. We've tested and evaluated, and that's over. It hasn't been used in any investigation of anyone.
Did the FBI ever notify Congress of their intention to test this product?
That I don't know the answer to. I can look into that.
Please do, because we're unaware of any notification. And then why would we test a product such as that if you don't have the intention to use it?
Well, we test, it's a good question, I'm glad you asked. We test and evaluate all sorts of technologies and products that, if in the wrong hands, can be used against our agents, for example, conducting their operations. So part of it is from a counterintelligence security perspective. We need to know what tools are out there that the bad guys can use against our people. So that's part of why we test and evaluate, because it allows us to inform our own countermeasures and things like that.
Okay, and my time has expired, but are you saying then that you would never intend to use that against U.S. persons only for counterintelligence? Is that true?
We decided not to use it, even before the current brouhaha, we decided not to use it for any purpose other than just the one I've already referred to.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your response. I yield back.
Representative Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've heard reference today that we were late to the game. NATO was late to the game. I do want to applaud the administration and NATO, particularly NATO, which is moving in light years for NATO to move and change what Germany has never done before, what Switzerland and others have never done before. But I think that begs the question is, are we still late to the key point here? I reference that because of the speech we saw Saturday by President Zelensky. It reminded me of Churchill during the Blitz, and here's why. Churchill wasn't just talking about his home country, as was Zelensky. He was talking about all of Europe. He was talking about the ideal of sovereign democratic countries and why you cannot let autocratic fascist countries take them over. But we've always had this discussion about what we should do, prefaced on the notion, well, they're not part of NATO, therefore. In the final analysis, Ukraine, what they represent, and what they have done so far represents the highest ideals, personification of what we wanted NATO to be. And for us to say, with the greatest respect, that we will fight for every inch of NATO territory, when Ukraine has done the real thing and faced being wiped off the face of the earth, I think we need to think about getting to that final point and recognizing and treating Ukraine for that which they have earned. And I know that that's a big move. But if we're going to get there anyway, because of what we are about to witness in the coming weeks, do we still want to be behind the curve? But as we move forward, let me just ask a few points. In 2019, Director Coates said that Russia and China were more aligned than at any point since the mid-1950s, and the relationship is likely to strengthen. Director Haynes, let me ask you, do you believe that's still the case? Was it more the case before this invasion? Has this changed that calculus? And do we believe that Beijing is looking at this as surprised, perhaps, as Putin was of the Western response?
Thank you, Representative. I think Director Coates was exactly right. I believe that it continues to be the case that they are getting closer together. We see that across a range of sectors, economic, political, security, and expect it to continue. I think there's a limit to which it will go, but nevertheless, that remains a concern. And in terms of the impact of the current crisis, I'd say that it's not yet clear to me exactly how it will affect the trajectory of their relationship. I think it's clear that China has not come out and criticized Russia for their actions, clearly, and yet at the same time, they did abstain, for example, in the context of the UN Security Council resolution and in other scenarios. And it does seem as if they are potentially paying a price for not criticizing Russia, and that may have an impact on how this trajectory moves forward. But I think, in general, I think it does continue to the two countries get closer together, and others may have thoughts.
All I would add, Congressman, is I think Director Coates was right, and I think, if anything, that relationship, the partnership between Russia and China has strengthened since 2019. I would add, though, that I think the President Xi and the Chinese leadership are a little bit unsettled by what they're seeing in Ukraine. They did not anticipate the significant difficulties the Russians were going to run into. I think they're unsettled by the reputational damage that can come by their close association with President Putin. Second, by the economic consequences at a moment when, they're facing lower annual growth rates than they've experienced for more than 3 decades. I think they're a little bit unsettled about the impact on the global economy. And third, I think they're a little bit unsettled by the way in which Vladimir Putin has driven Europeans and Americans much closer together. I think they've valued their relationship with Europe and valued what they believe to be their capacity to try to